Alright, welcome back for the last part of chapter 2.5 from the metabolism unit for Amplify Science. We're going to look at this last question here about a player named Ezra to see how he takes care of his body. Ezra is breathing normally and eats a cheese sandwich for lunch. Cheese contains a lot of protein and bread is mostly starch. Ezra plans to play basketball later in the afternoon. Alright, so I know that Ezra's eaten a sandwich with protein and starch. I can imagine that. I'm going to move on. What does Ezra need from the food he ate and the air he breathes so he can play basketball? How do Ezra's body systems work together to get the molecules he needs into his cells? And how do his cells use these molecules to make energy for his body to run? In this case, this question is actually very easy for us to model using the simulation. You can go ahead and try that now. I'm going to save time by avoiding that so that you can use it on your own time and start typing away what I think you should put for the answer. So to begin with, we need to answer this question by question. You can tell because there's a question mark, followed by a question mark, followed by a question mark, which means it's really looking for about 3 sentences. 1 sentence for each answer. You might use 2 to answer it, depending on how hard it is. In particular, the second one will probably take about 2 or 3 sentences, but it should be at least 3. Let's go ahead and try it now. I'm going to go ahead and start typing as I answer this. What does Ezra need from food he ate and the air he breathes so he can play basketball? Well, that's easy. So I'll go ahead and make a complete sentence. Ezra needs to have, well, let me think about what he needs to have. First, he needs to breathe. So he needs to have oxygen from the air. From the air. And he also needs other molecules. And he needs starch. If you're not me, you'll spell it correctly. Starch from the sandwich, as well as protein from the sandwich. These are the 2 molecules he gets from the cheese and from the bread. Again, if you're not me, you'll spell it correctly. I'm an engineer, not an English teacher. And then you're going to go ahead and put a period there, because that's what we've answered. The first part is done. What molecules does he need? He needs starch from the sandwich, as well as protein from the sandwich. How do Ezra's body systems work together to get the molecules he needs into his cells? That part's easy enough to do. I can see that in the sim, and I've seen it a few times. Ezra's body systems will break down the starch into glucose and the protein into amino acids. So that's the first step. We've seen this a few times before. Ezra's body systems are going to take it into his stomach. His stomach will churn up the starch and glucose and move to the small intestine, where it'll get broken down into glucose and into amino acids. These will then, use a comma because we'll use correct grammar. These will then move into the circulatory system. Circulatory system. Oops. You can see that sometimes even when sounding out words, you can get them wrong. Thankfully, on your computers, you have an autocorrect function. You simply need to click it with both fingers on the touchpad, and it will bring up an option to autocorrect. Alright, into the circulatory system. The lungs, and this is the second part where I talk about the oxygen molecules, because remember, I don't need just food, I also need oxygen molecules. We'll bring in oxygen molecules from the air outside and into the bloodstream, which remember is part of the circulatory system. Alright, so I've just covered the second question in about 2 sentences. His body will break down starch into glucose, proteins into amino acids. These will then move into the circulatory system, and the lungs will bring in oxygen, which will move them into the bloodstream. So now I've answered how do they work together. I need to round it out with how do they get into a cell, so I'll add one more. Both, not even both. I will say, I'll list them all. Oxygen, starch, not starch, because starch doesn't go into the circulatory system, glucose, and amino acids will all move from the bloodstream into the cells of the body. So you can see there I added one more sentence to clear up that last part, move into the cells. And now we need to get to the last part of this question. How do his cells use these molecules to make energy for his body to run? This part is twofold. It comes in 2 possible ways. The first we can say is simply this. His body combines glucose, amino acids, and oxygen to create energy for the body. And that could be true. If you've been paying attention to our lesson part of the class, then you know from the guided notes that they do this with the powerhouse of the cell. It's called a mitochondria. In fact, you saw one at the bottom of the diagram in your model. So I'm going to go ahead and add that so that you can add it too. So we'll read it one more time. His body combines glucose, amino acids, and oxygen to create cell from the body inside the mitochondria of the cell. With that, I checked the question. What does Ezra need from the food he ate in the air he breathed so he can play basketball? He needs oxygen, starch, and protein. How do Ezra's body systems work together to get molecules he needs into his cells? I wrote that here in about 3 sentences. Ezra's body system will break down the starch into glucose, the protein and amino acids. These will then move into the circulatory system. The lungs will breathe in oxygen molecules from the air outside and into the bloodstream. Oops, I made a small error. I'm going to go ahead and correct that. These are the kind of things you should be looking for as well to correct small errors into the bloodstream. Oxygen, glucose, and amino acids will all move from the bloodstream into the cells of the body. His body combines glucose, amino acids, and oxygen to create energy for the body inside the mitochondria of the cell. Alright, I've answered every part of this question, and I've corrected any small errors I saw. In particular, I fixed this word into. What you saw me do here is 3 things. The first thing I did is read the question and identify the best strategy to answer it. In this case, the strategy was to look at how many questions there are, and I did that by looking at these question marks, and answering all 3 of them one after the other. The second thing I did is I took it one at a time. I began answering them one question at a time. And then the third and final step is once I was done writing it, I reviewed it to make sure I didn't miss anything or didn't need to add anything, like adding the mitochondria of a cell, which I know from my guided notes. Once you've done all that, the question is complete. These are the kind of strategies you should use when you answer the first written response question on your own. But don't forget that when you're done with the written response and the multiple choice, you should click the hand in button, as I'll be looking to grade these as extra credit for your test, depending on how well you do. If you fail all the questions, it's obviously not going to help you very much. Alright, with that said, you finished 2.5. You're pretty far ahead of your classmates if you've gotten all here by yourself. So, congratulations, and I look forward to talking with you about these tests.